Welcome to another Figure Week, Hard Surface Week, Organic Week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Al-Douri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learn in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important. That's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Digital Artcast again. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you guys had a good holiday break and a good Christmas. Welcome back to the next year. Hoping this one will be a little bit better than the last one, but God knows at this point. God knows. Today we are speaking to a living legend in my eyes, and someone that I've wanted to have on the podcast for a long time, mostly because I'm just such a huge fan of him and the world he's created and everything surrounding. If you guys can welcome along today our amazing guest, Mr. Lorne Lanning. Hey Lorne.
Hey, Gordy. Thanks for having me on, man. And so, is Gordy what you want to be called, or should I say Gordon? I always want to be correct.
Oh my God, this is hilarious because we just interviewed Carla Ortiz, and I said to Carla that she was the first person in about 5 years of me doing this podcast who actually asked what I want to be called. Yeah. And now you're the second person in the space of a month, so that is spooky. Well, yeah, Gordy's fine. Yeah.
Okay, good. So because what happens to me is sometimes I'll be talking to an artist, right, and I'll get to know them over the years, but I've only read their name, and so let's say with Bobby Cho,
right, yeah,
and then I'd say, wait a minute, and people say, why are you saying his name wrong? Because I was saying Chu, because that's how I was pronouncing it, and no one would ever correct me. Right. So I asked Bobby, and this has happened to me many times. So Bobby's just the example, and Bobby's a great friend and talent. Is I was like, what's the proper pronunciation? He goes, either way, man. And I'm like, no, it's not. But you just don't want to tell me I'm saying it wrong. Like, don't let me keep saying it wrong. People all the time are like Lorne or Lorne or
okay, right.
Right. And it's like,
Lorne,
I
right.
just, I don't say like, well, whatever you want. I'm like, it's Lorne. Just one syllable. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
But, so that's happened to me a lot. So I push the point of like, come on, man. Am I saying it right? Am I calling?
Yeah.
But you got to be careful with that shit. But
man.
I never get corrected, which is really a curse,
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
thank you for asking. It's very appreciative. So
you bet, man.
Yeah. So now I know you super well, and I've researched you a bit, and I've been a fan of you in general for a long time and the things you've created. But for people who don't know, can you kind of give a quick summarize of kind of who you are and what you do at the moment, anyway?
Sure. So I'm Lorne Lanning. I'm a game designer. I was co-founder of Oddworld Inhabitants. We started in 1994. I started with a partner, Sherry McKenna. We were working together at Rhythm and Hue Studios in Los Angeles, which the last films I saw getting done there was like back in the Babe. Was like that was shortly George Miller's talking, animals, and so they did a lot of award-winning work at Rhythm and Hues. Later on, Life of Pi, and all kinds of lots of Academy Awards and stuff. So that was an interesting experience. I was doing that for about 5 years. Before that, I was in aerospace, visualizing weapons using 3D graphics, because at the time, basically, most people didn't know how to use it. So it was an opportunity to go in on some highly crazy classified shit. It was kind of an amazing experience. And there was an interview that you had mentioned earlier, Gordy, on Ars Technica, where I go into more detail on that, and that's a really long interview. But but that was very eye-opening on a lot of levels. I went to school in New York not knowing what to start in, and in my first year of college, I realized I had to make money, and I had always believed like the only way I'm ever going to make money is through art, because at least I had artistic skills and always kind of shined at that and enjoyed it. And so I got into understanding then how do you make money with art, and that made me first realize I'm in the wrong school. I need to go to a professional illustration school. So then I, after the first year of college, I went to School of Visual Arts, focused in on photorealism, which later became photorealism painting, which was my focus for illustration, commercial illustration. And in the course of that, started to realize like what you actually do and how artists actually make money. And this was in the mid 80s. I went to college in 1983. I began, and then I realized computers were going to take over, and that's kind of a long story, but I realized it, and I was afraid that I would be broken on the street and homeless like so many other people in New York at the time. And so I packed my bags, and after a brief stint in the fine art world, working for the guy Jack Goldstein, running a studio, making his paintings, and he was my favorite artist in the fine art world, like at the big time. I was seeing his works in the Whitney Biennial and the Modern Museum in New York, and like major level stuff. But then I worked for him for a while, and then I realized, okay, well, the future with computers is out in LA. Moved out to LA to get into the industry. The industry of computer graphics had just crashed. This was in the beginning, like shortly after films like Last Starfighter, which actually my partner, Sherry McKenna, did produced the effects for, and other things like Labyrinth, and things that were using early CG in that day. And so that was why I wound up in aerospace, was because there was no work in LA, because the three biggest computer graphics companies that were the whole reason I moved out there had folded up because of just public company money, buyouts, and shady shit here and there. And so the greatest talented places on the West Coast, aside from PDI, who was up in Palo Alto, because they were amazing. And of course, the efforts that were going on in LucasArts that Pixar was born out of. But we're talking, I'm at a period now when I'm in California where Pixar is still trying to sell medical imaging equipment for MRIs. Right. So it was like they had a dream, but it was far from manifesting, and Jobs hadn't invested yet. So that's a short roundup of the history, but it all interconnects because of and I grew up a lot largely in New England, where I spent a lot of time with nature and things like that, which really had a huge impact on how I looked at production design, anatomy, and behavioral, sort of I would call low-level AI, how things behave, how to make life forms that are virtual look like they're more alive, how to make them more compelling. That became a big focus of mine in the creation of Oddworld. And Oddworld's still going. We just released the Xbox version of Soulstorm recently, and that's getting a really nice critical review. And then there's a lot of other things on the plate for Oddworld, but also focusing more on other alternatives of emerging media and cross media and things like this. So it's a really interesting time, and I think that's my 2-second review. And I became partners with Sherry McKenna in '94, and still are partners with Sherry McKenna.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, it's a lot to cover, right? That's a whole. I'm talking to some people who are like in their early 30s, maybe late 20s sometimes, and they're just kind of at the cusp of their career. Like it's just starting to really take off.
Yeah.
But you've been at the forefront of technology and your career for a while now. I don't want to insult you or anything like that. You've been there a while, Lorne.
So I started doing 3D animation in 86.
Okay.
1986. Yeah.
I was just born.
So sometimes I was working with like in Soulstorm, I was working with a number of teams across the world, and I'd be working with them, and it was kind of ironic. They were like, "When did you start in graphics?" And I was like, "How old are you?" and they'd say how old they were. I was like, "Well, imagine 8 years before you were born, I was art directing CG."
Wow,
it's like so your entire life. This has been my
career. Yeah. But it's good though as well, because at least at the age you're at, you're running the studio, you're running your own production. I mean, there's so many people who get bogged down into that where like they're just another cog in the machine for the most of their life, right? They just work on CG films, and for some people that's fine, that's what they want. But at least you've ventured out and got your own piece of the pie, right? You're making your own thing.
Yeah, we it's kind of interesting. I think when we look at artists throughout history, for the most part, art was paid for. You go back into the Rembrandt and previous, right? Art was very expensive to make. Someone had to go gather the spices and the flowers and all the colors to make the oils, to make the paint. Like it was to mine the marble for, Da Vinci and so it was largely a elitist sponsored, and you were still a cog, and you couldn't really get out of it. Rembrandt was the one who started making the most money, and then you get into the 20th century, and you got Picasso, who was one of the richest artists ever before he died, and then you have there's artists today that will be much richer when they die.
Oh, of course.
In the fine art world. But so things change, but really like digital art and games and visual effects sort of created a new opportunity for artists. And then you have people, film directors are artists too, right? They're just focused on story and cinematography and actor performances. But when you look at it, and I saw like, Lucas and Spielberg, who I had a lot of respect for in their craft making. I think you have to just be, you might not like the films, but the craftsmanship is unbelievable. And it was like they were becoming billionaires. And I was like, wow, what an opportunity like never before in history. And today, like more artists are. Well, let me put it this way: when I went to school at School of Visual Arts started in '84 at the Visual Arts for a few years, and then I later went to Cal Arts in California to study animation at basically Disney school, but and film effects. But at that time, you would be told in the room of what was arguably one of the 3 top art schools in the world, and in that room, the professionals would be saying, we're talking to a big room, like maybe it'd be like a visiting artist or something like that. And they're like, 1 out of 100 of you might be able to survive as a career as an artist. The rest of you are going to have to take other jobs, and maybe you'll be painting on the weekend. Like that's how it was. They were like, there are 2 companies in this country that really pay full-time artists. And and because I think a lot of these guys didn't understand that aerospace was already doing that, automotive industry
Yeah.
was already doing it, but it was more engineering visualization instead of art, right? And that was Walt Disney
Right.
and Walmart, Hallmark cards. So if you wanted a
Okay.
full-time job as an illustrator, you could go work at one of those two companies, and that was kind of the standard. And
Yeah.
so it was grim, man. So I was watching New York decay into crack cocaine and insanity, and
Yeah.
seeing more and more people becoming homeless and not having,
Mhm.
when my parents died, I got left a bill, not an inheritance, right? So
Okay.
there was no safety net at all, and
Yeah, of
it
course.
made me very cognitive of the world gets to be a more expensive place if you don't figure out how to swim in it, you'll drown in it. And
Yeah.
and I got excited about the opportunities and reading a lot of business stories
Mhm.
of like at the time Japan was smoking it in the
Mhm.
business world. We find out later,
Mhm.
largely because of fraud, but
Yeah.
and corrupt practices that weren't being exposed. And so everyone
Right.
thought, Japan was the most brilliant. And they were rocketing, and so I was reading like my bridge to
Mhm.
America, which was the founder of Minolta, and just
Mhm.
stories about like big business, Lucas's stories
Mhm.
and other
Mhm.
big business people's stories. Not because I wanted to be like a huge capitalist or anything like that, but I did
Mhm.
hope to overcome the economic barrier where you're worried about your future all the time.
Of
If
course.
you've seen a lot of tragedies in your life, and I did. So I was like, I don't want to be
Yep.
like that. So how do I make money with
Yeah.
art? And now we're in a world
Mhm.
today where how many digital artists in the world, and
Oh yeah.
what happened and
YouTube
what's happened
especially,
with game?
and
Yeah.
yeah,
So I'm thrilled to see that because in my own lifetime, I got to see a
the change.
class of
Yeah.
craftsmen and artists that throughout history had very few opportunities, like really few. And then we get here, and as we emerge into the 21st century, it's like someone talented today in animation, modeling, the whole spectrum of role in an art pipeline. Anyone who's really good at that should have no problem getting work today. Unless,
Yeah.
as I was told when I was a kid, there are people that are better than these artists that I work with. I was told this by
Mm.
art directors and stuff, right? There are
Mm.
people that are better, but they're assholes, and I don't want to work with them. So you don't have to
Yeah.
be the best as long as you know how to work with people, and you're a team player, and
Yeah.
and you're fun to work with. I'll work with
Mm.
you, even though there might be someone better who's a jerk. I don't want to work with a jerk. So I was like, huh, okay, I don't have to be the best, but I'm gonna try, not because I
Mm.
want to have to beat anyone, but I think healthy competition is really good for polishing up your chops, right?
Of course.
And the great thing I think about the art world, and it goes with the game industry too, is that uh, unlike Hollywood, which is star driven and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of as filthy corrupt and bordering on
Mm-hmm.
demonic as you can get, just listen
Yeah.
to testing what just happened with Britney Spears, right? It was all in front of our
Yeah. Of
faces for
course.
years, and then you find out she's actually kind of a slave.
Mm-hmm.
So the dark side of Hollywood was something, not that I got too deep into, but I got some insights into what was going on, and I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was its own revelation. It's like, but it was locked up. It was kind of like if you didn't feel like you had family that was in the industry. Everyone wants to be a star. Everyone wants to be making movies. Everyone wants to
Right.
be a writer. And oftentimes it depends on if you went to USC film school, you got surrounded by a good crowd, or Harvard
Mm-hmm.
film school, or
Mm-hmm.
Yale. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the high end of that, and it if you were connected to that, you had a much better chance. You had something to look forward to. If you had an
Right.
inheritance coming, you had something to look forward to, and you could take more chances. I just felt like it was desperation of climbing a tightrope with a bunch of pit of crocodiles down below, just
Yeah.
waiting to do your weekend stuff.
I mean, that's kind of also where the American system is kind of at its highest and lowest, because I know within Europe there's enough practices in place, because we've been a continent and a country for a bit longer than you guys, but
Yeah.
there's enough practices in place that, like, if you're sick across here, and you're poor, you can get treated. If you're homeless, there's sometimes, well, not always, but there is mostly homes. But with like America, it really is sink or swim, right? Like if you don't
Yeah.
swim, you're destined to sink. And I saw a recent documentary, and it was about a guy who was working in IT for so many years at a really high pace, and then he burnt out and had a panic attack and loads of other things. And he was now living in his car by the freeway in the 405 because he could work, but then at the same time he couldn't afford to live anywhere. and they had no medical insurance or cover. So like, you're only like one medical debt bill away from like basically
that's
being
how I
homeless in
felt.
America.
That's how
Yeah.
I grew up feeling that way, and it didn't help that my father was nuclear subs for a big part of his career. It was like 17 years, I believe, in nuclear submarines through the Bay of Pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis and all this crazy shit, So he used to tell me as a kid, future wars will be fought over clean water. And I was like, wow. So I'm like 5 and 6 hearing this shit. It was like, we're not going to make it, And at that time, it was all like nuclear, how are we not going to blow each other up? And it was a sense of desperation, of survival. And it's funny because oftentimes I do, fortunately I've been able to go all over the world and meet all kinds of people, and games are international, and of
course,
in the course of that, it is interesting because Americans are conditioned to be like, you're either going to be a cog in a wheel, or you can be an entrepreneur, or you can be a complete, you lost it all. And we celebrate the winners, but we don't really mention the losers, So if you look at how many people failed in Silicon Valley, you don't. That's not really a statistic anyone wants to hear. We want to hear about how Bill Gates did and how Zuckerberg and all these people made fortunes. But of course, there are so many more that lost everything. Mortgaged their house, hoping that next VC deal would come through, and so California was really interesting because if you got into the industries of like entertainment or tech venture, the road was paved with bodies of those who tried before, and none of them are sung heroes, right? And then it's like there's a few gleaming lights out there, and everyone's like, but it's kind of like turtles heading for the street light, going trying to reach their breeding ground, and then thinking it's the moon, and then getting run over in the road.
It's ridiculous, man.
Yeah,
but then it's one of these things as well. I was going to say it's one of these things where, I mean, there is some hope that's always gleaned. I mean, for me, when I was working through college and trying to, because I changed careers, right? I was an engineer till I was 28, and then I left to go back and chase my dream. I mean, I've done it now. I'm working for Matt,
That's a great preconditioning for being a technical artist, though.
Oh yeah, totally.
An engineer,
but then like guys I was watching who were inspiring at the time was, I mean, you can't probably see it in my arm because it's like covered, but I've got a Monkey Island tattoo. I've got my arm for Guybrush. But then like Tim Schafer, right, who runs Double Fine, I remember I watched his recent documentary when they were starting to make Psychonauts 2, and he talked about the first one and how Xbox like basically pulled the rug from under them like a year out before they finished after grinding on it for 4 years. And like, I mean, it's just so easy for it to just change like that, right? Just the whole thing just to collapse.
Funny you should mention Tim because A, I'm a huge fan, and then B, I like to consider him a good friend. But at that time, we were kind of going through that journey as parallel independent developers that were working on the Xbox release.
Of course, because you'd be making Oddworld as well,
and I mean, Tim was a legend in the industry before anyone heard who I was, and so I was kind of enamored from those LucasArts games and stuff. But what I can tell you, if you watch there was a film about releasing the Xbox, I think, like a documentary, and they highlighted people that were involved with that launch, and it's funny because of the anniversary. I just did like 3 more interviews for different outlets, mainstream outlets that are covering the history of the Xbox. But at that time, we were all going through the independent, unless you had mega hits, the independent game development companies were going through major challenges, and deals structures were changing. So you wound up like you were working a lot more, but you probably might make a lot less, and that was just like expectations of game getting better. Why are you buying a new console? Because games are better. That means games going to be more expensive. That means conditions and deals get tighter. And if you watch that video, there's some scenes where they're at Double Fine and they're talking to their team, and it was like my heart broke because I knew exactly how they were feeling. You're trying to keep a team motivated, but you're facing like these, Mack trucks heading right at you, and so I could just feel, empathetically feel for what was going on there, and if you're able to watch that and you watch Tim Schafer and his executive producing partner, talking to the group, you can feel there's this uneasiness, and we were living it at the time as well. So anyway, I'm a huge fan of Tim's, but it was difficult. Fortunately, he got his pot at the end of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow,
Eventually,
you know.
yeah, that
and
thing. Yeah,
and
I was just
selling to
going to say that
Microsoft.
E3. Well, I was just going to say the E3 last year was totally unexpected. I mean, I knew Phil was really on the warpath to like just buy every property he could. But then that video they put in Double Fine's individual YouTube where he was like on black and white and it was all moody and the rain was going. He was like, "Yeah, Microsoft just approaches with a big pile of money." And we said yes. It's like
Yeah,
that was what he
yeah.
came up to. He was like, "Yeah, that was the end result." So,
So what's
which was
funny is
yeah,
like, you know, and Tim's great at one-liners and stuff, but I think that was like a 10-month deal in the workings. Like none of these
course.
things, unless you're super big money maker, then they all line up and they're all trying to give you their candy, you know. But yeah, that was a long deal to make, and he stuck it out, and they stuck it out, and people just can't. It's hard to imagine how hard their journey was, you know. And I only say their journey because we're talking specifically about Double Fine, but largely it was almost most independent developers, and most didn't survive.
Yeah.
You know, it was that difficult, and they were smart people, talented people.
Yeah. I mean, Tim, I think his brain is just full of so many stories, right? So you're always going to get some great stuff, but it's finding the investors. But then I think where they were smart was when they brought on their business manager who started to make, like Korean deals for like re-releasing certain games or like making PC versions of stuff or stuff that would basically keep them going. And of course, like the Kickstarter, right? The Kickstarter changed the way that worked and he raised 3 million. And so, I mean, he's although he might not seem it because he's quite sometimes introvert, he is savvy with business. Like he has have his head on kind of swivel where he sees opportunities and jumps at them when he needs to. Because even the fact that he left Lucas Arts to go start Double Fine was a big gamble as well. And
That's
right.
Even
though there's interviews when for back in the day, people still get emotional talking about when that game got cancelled. Like it's still ingrained in them.
Yeah. Well, big impact in the history of gaming, Tim, and his work and what they did from pre Double Fine from Lucas to Double Fine. Yeah, it's a good story. There should be a book someday, and I'm sure there's a lot of details there that many of us never heard.
I need to get your Rolodex out, Lorne. At one point, you need to try and get a hold of Tim for me again. Because I've interviewed about 5 people for that studio, and I've never been able to get Tim on. So
really?
He's the next one on the peging order. But
okay. Let me make a note. I'll try.
Write it down for later.
If he's probably got illustrations of himself sitting on a deserted island with a martini. I was happy for him when I saw him. They sold. Very happy. Okay.
We all were definitely. But then, so going back to you, because you know, we can't obviously glaze over the fact that you've also had this huge impact on the gaming world. I mean, Oddworld, for me, Abe's Oddessy was a huge thing at the time, and because it was so different, right? It was what you were expecting. It was the normal thing that was coming out, the shooter, the racer, your game had a brain, right? It was trying to tell a story about nature, the way we interact with animals, cultures of the past that we've obviously bastardized, but like there's a whole, because you talked about how nature made you see things differently, and you talk about in the Ars Technica thing as well about how the chanting, the idea that you didn't want to give Abe a gun, and that was a problem you had to solve really early on. And I mean, that whole thing looking back now must seem like a blur, but then some of the fondest memories you probably got, right, of making games.
Not really. It's like games.
Oh, okay.
Games are. I hear a lot of people go, "Oh, I love making games." I don't know. I usually think they're full of shit because it's kind of like saying I love getting whipped and beat up and dragged down the street. It's really hard unless you have like out of the gate smashing success. Like Notch or something. Minecraft. But it's just really difficult, and the pressures. It's like you have a number of converging factors if you're getting your own stuff financed, and you're in that loop. No, and so you have pressure from investors, pressure from the market, pressure from your teams, pressure to hire in an increasingly competitive hiring practices industry, pressure to get talent, and learning new things. Like I went to art school, so I didn't go to business school, so I didn't learn how to manage people. I didn't learn any of those skills. I had to just try and pick them up from.
You had the business books though, and by the way, just to interject, your art book collection is one of the most impressive things I have ever seen in my life.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's something where my deepest passion is research. It's it really is, and out of research, that's where I really find the stones to build a house out of. And
of course,
that it's really exciting for me. It's like a long time ago, I had to sit back and go, wait a minute. I was so paranoid about not making it that I just had an ethic where I was like, no matter what, even if I'm only being employed 40 hours a week, I'm going to work 80 hours a week. And the rest of the time will be my own learning, or I'll have the key to the office and I'll be able to get in there and use those Unix machines that no one my age could afford. They were like $80,000 a piece back then. And the software was another $80,000. So it was like, you didn't own those computers like you can own now. Like your gaming machine now is your production machine, right? But it wasn't like that.
Of course.
And so I was so paranoid about it that I was working so much that I wasn't really weighing as much of what do I enjoy? What part of the process do I enjoy? Because I kind of learned early that I don't want to, people say, well, work smarter, not harder. And it was like, yeah, that's a good idea, but really you're going to have to, it depends on how far you want to go. And if you really want to go far, you're going to have to work smarter and harder. Right. Like that's really it. There's no, I have not seen an easy medium except where someone is unstoppably prolific. And that would be like Mark, the guy who created Walking Dead. So, he was a comic book artist, writer. Mark.
Oh God,
he's got a company, Skybound. But sorry,
okay.
It's like right now I'm in the new phase of learning entirely.
Mark Grayson. Is that right?
Mark
Grayson?
No.
No.
So creator of Walking Dead, the graphic novel series, or
that's Robert Kirkman, isn't it?
Kirkman.
Yeah.
So this is something that goes on too. Like my memory is decreasing on things that I've done because I'm trying to learn new things that are going on, and there's such a focus on there that I think your brain, neural patterns start.
Your brain only has room for so much. Yeah.
But like Mark Kirkman is someone who, if you look at his history of work or talk to any of the people, at Skybound or the work with him, they're like, this guy is relentlessly prolific as a writer. Or you get people like Andrew Jones, the artist, right? Android and his work. But it's like you can't stop people like that. They are born to create
machines.
They are. And Bobby Cho and his partner Kay is like, no matter what, they always have a drawing pad in their hand. They always are active. They're communicating with all kinds of people, creating lessons and things like this. And then eventually they just have a huge body of work that's undeniable. And then in time, like Bobby credits me with, he goes, you gave us the first real job. And it was a Tom Hanks project I brought down there for an animated series. Or I brought up there, and Bobby just nailed it, But I had seen his work coming out of I was judging on the CG Society's books, the expose books. They used to do the best digital art in the world, whatever annuals, and there was a great cast of judges. But I was seeing this guy's work year after year. I'm like, this guy's incredible, and it was Bobby Cho, and so then when I gave him the work, but now try to hire Bobby Cho. Like every I know some major producers of animated films, because we used to all work together, and Sherry's had a long history, glorious history in the computer graphics, visual effects business before we started Oddworld. But the point is that today, I can tell you, like if DreamWorks is working on a new animated movie, or Sony is, or even Pixar, Pixar tends to do most things in-house, except sometimes the director. But they're always being asked to design characters for animated movies now. And this it wasn't that long ago that they just couldn't help themselves from creating more great, focusing on making their craft better. In a really simple thing, like almost all of their work, you look at it, and it's highlighting characters in basic settings that you look at and you can tell the story. And it's like, they're not trying to create the latest big, epic thing. They just stayed focused at a very particular area of expertise. And now today they're, possibly in, like I tell you, every time I know someone's making another animated movie and the producer goes, are those guys available? And I say, you can reach out to them, and usually they're booked, so what a great spot to be in. Right. And they're still working out of Canada, but working with Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that, like, you know, the Lightbox is now a thing as well, and then they just released Magma Studio, which is obviously the online painting thing, and you
Yeah.
know, he also runs Schoolism, but then he's
Yeah.
also working as a concept artist. Like,
Yeah.
how many things can one person do? It is we call them unicorns in our industry. So yeah,
Well, they are,
um,
and K too. Like
yeah,
K's a powerhouse, So together they're just kind of meant to be.
unstoppable force.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But
but
more power to him.
then
But I can
you
tell you,
had
Bobby's always thinking as far ahead of the curve as he can about the business of art, right? And
right.
that I think is a huge thing. It's like if you can try and keep those things connected, where you're
Mhm.
focused on the business as an artist,
Mhm.
but you're focused
Mhm.
on your art as an artist too, right? And
Right.
there's a difference there. And
Mhm.
like as an example, back in the old days, when people were, airbrushing was a high tech form of art, right? When I was going to school,
Right.
I met some guys that were making the most money as illustrators, like
Mhm.
because they just became the go to guy. If you need a tube of toothpaste tomorrow for Crest, I can get it to you, but you're going to pay a premium
Right.
for it. And there was a guy in New York that I met, and he was selling his loft in the 1980s for like $500,000. That I thought was all the money in the world at that time, And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, an artist had a loft in Soho, and it was epic, man. And he did all the work himself, and it was a big place,
Yeah.
and it was just really outstanding. And
Mhm.
but so he was passionate about knowing that he was the go-to guy in a crisis and he could always deliver, and so he was 1,000% reliable, and he would do more jobs than anybody because that was his model. And he was making like a couple $100,000 in the 80s as an illustrator, which was unheard of. It was completely
Right.
unheard of, so anyway, just some nostalgia there.
Yeah. But then again, it's one of these things where business is something that's not really taught as an art form, because when you learn to be an artist, you're not really taught. I mean, now I think, especially with the younger generation, I say younger than me in my 30s, but people who are just coming out of school now are looking into saying, well, there's Patreon, there's YouTube, there's DeviantArt, there's other things in the world that I can now have a passive income from on top of my job. And I think it's a weird world where business is almost like people are becoming entrepreneurs, and they're like, somebody said to me years ago that we're not artists, we're small businesses, right? We're people who usually work by contract and do one specific thing really well and then go out to the highest bidder. So for you, the one thing I think you probably done well was bringing people together, right? And working on projects. That was kind of like your main skill. I mean, you were an artist, of course, but then I think you had such a head for organizing and bringing together collectives that was almost what Oddworld was born out of, right?
I'd say, yeah, Sherry had a lot more experience in hiring and firing. Like I had been approving hires for like Rhythm and Hughes to hire, but I had never like fired anyone, which is, one of the most nerve-wracking things if you've never done it, and if you've never done it and you're a good person, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible experience going through it. But eventually you have to do that. But in pulling together teams, like I could identify talent, but she was like, only hire the best. Only hire the best. She came out of a model of doing that. And then that gets harder because everyone wants the best, right? But yeah, I'd say that worked out pretty well. And then in the United States, expenses of teams become another level. And this is where in 2005 we went, wow, we're either going to be acquired in a way we don't like and we're minimalized in the value, or we just stop having the huge team and see if we can take the IP to new heights. And I think that was a mixed blessing, but we still have it today, and people are really interested on different levels. So I can't complain. But yeah, pulling a team together and being a team player is something that I don't think artists do this naturally. Like honestly, like, or at least maybe that was my generation. Like, we're the individuals, we're the creative, man. I don't want to be a leader. I just want to be a great artist. I don't want to be a manager. Teamwork, fuck it, man. Just be your best, And so you had this attitude, because it wasn't like we came out of playing football and hockey and shit like that, where you learned team sports and had captains. We were more like this kind of
the quiet kids.
Yeah, introverted often, but working with teams is a huge skill. Management is one of the art forms that really, I think, virtually everyone should make it a discipline, particularly if you're an artist, because I mean, if you're someone like Craig Mullins, or just one of these incredible painters. You probably don't have to think about it too much, because that's all. He's another guy. You can't stop him. You can't stop him from painting. If you took away his paintbrushes and shit, he'd be making sand art, and it would blow your mind. There's certain things. It's like, if you buy a rat terrier, he's gonna dig holes in the yard. Like, there's no way you can't stop him. And so.
But, I mean, we're talking about legends and hiring the best. We've talked previously before we started recording about Steve Olds, right? Who was one of your key hires.
Steve Olds was brilliant. We worked together at Rhythm and Hughes. He was really a brilliant designer with extreme self-discipline, like extreme.
Right.
And he taught himself.
Which is crazy, because I remember I was watching, I don't know, do you know a guy in LA called Rob Brown, by chance?
Yeah, he used to work for us. He was art director at
so
at
I used to watch his YouTube channels and his streams, and I'd
Is that
Robert
Brown from the Central Coast? And he's working for
he's a contractor.
He's great.
But he had a funny thing right? I'll tell you about this because you'll laugh, right? But then he has a jar in his, and I talked about it during the stream about like his, because he got into the eventually, like, I used to work in Oddworld, and I was like, I love the game, and he's dude. So he brought this jar, right, this glass jar, and it was pencils, a jar full of pencils down to the nubs, and he was like, this is the mojo jar of what Steve Olds used to draw Oddworld, and this is what was left, and
he kept it. He got it. Oh,
yeah.
I wish I had that. That's a great. Wow, I didn't know that. But like you're talking to Steve Olds is. I mean, this guy, like, a couple times, and I still have all the original drawings though. I mean, from all the Oddworld productions, I have about, if you stacked it in just sheets of paper, it's about 6 feet high.
Wow.
Right? And then, but Steve Olds, I remember one time I got really annoyed and really blown away at the same time, because I couldn't do it.
Right.
But and we're talking about a character, and he designed Abe and the Gluckins and things like that. He just did this thing, and he goes, well, I think if he was holding it like this, and he takes this pencil that has a very long, sharp to it, and he goes on the page like this, and you were like, that's a forearm. It was like an elbow and forearm. But it was like 2 strokes, and just, kind of how like inkers used to do with wide quill pens, where they go thin and go fat. And I was so blown away about it. I was like, fuck, man. How do you do that shit? And the answer is, you draw constantly and you strive to be better. And in Steve's case, he just always wanted everything better. And and that could get difficult sometimes. Ask Rob about that. Because they were getting feedback. And Farzad, who is a great designer as well. But Steve Olds was a hardcore talent, and there should be books on his work. But we featured him prominently in the Oddworld book. But so I got to work with some amazing people, and we were able to convince Steve to join with us really early. He was like the third member of Oddworld, really.
Oh wow! Still need. Every time I'm on Amazon recently, I've been seeing that book more and more with a white cover, and I'm in the picture of Abe and in the front. But I need to grab that at one point.
You mean
like the big book, the big 400 page,
the big one that was done, the Oddworld Origins, Abe Origins.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
That was fun.
I need to get a copy. So, but like, I mean, Steve's work. Wow, like, he's a big inspiration as well. But Abe in general, because I remember, you're funny enough. This is really crazy as well. I was at an industry workshop in 2016, and one guy was doing a talk on just like how you can do art differently or convey different messages with certain art forms, and he used Abe as an Oddworld as an example, and done a whole speech on Oddworld, and it was crazy. And at the time, I had actually randomly added Steve on Facebook, just as I do, just randomly adding people. And I said to the guy, I says, so I've been speaking to Steve Olds on and off, and I'm sure and I actually sent him pictures of the presentation. He was like, oh, that's crazy, man. Like, I never thought. But Oddworld, I think is you only see the initial bit because you're inside the company spitting the stuff out, right? But you don't maybe see, or you probably have over the years seen the impact of what the world you created has done for everybody.
I hear it a lot, like sometimes like I believe in really. Let me just say, as a character trait, right?
Hmm.
I don't care for people that see great stuff and don't comment.
Hmm.
Like they go, oh,
Hmm.
like I hate that shit, man. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
great, it's great. Give credit where it's due, right? Don't play
Yep.
cool, right? Like you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
impressing anyone. And when people doing that in business, I'm out of the room.
Hmm.
When people are like, they're like, well,
Hmm.
yeah, I guess. And it's like
Hmm.
this smokes your shit. You should admit it, right? And
Yeah.
if you're not,
Hmm.
and you're trying to use that as leverage, you just leverage yourself out the door. Because who
Of
wants to
course.
work with that? It's like a
Hmm.
beautiful girl who wants. She wakes up in the morning and she puts on herself, right? And
Hmm.
then she
Yeah.
looks great, but the husband's like, well, what about down there? What about over here?
Hmm.
And it's like, fuck you, guy. You know what I mean? Like, there's a way. It's like give credit where it's due, and don't
Of course.
play cool. And now,
Yeah.
what happens is the worse of an attitude you have, the less
Hmm.
people want to give you credit. So
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah,
gotta
yeah,
you gotta try and be fair and observe that as well. But yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's, I think, where people, why I've made so many friends in the industry, right? Whereas I only really got my first full time job this year, right? After doing a bit of freelancing, it was for Matt, and I'm working on, we're a startup, so we're no this huge name like Blizzard
yeah,
or Activision or whatever. But then people know me and have known me the last couple of years because of the podcast, right? When I went out to LA last year, I was on a plane going from Chicago to LAX, and I was ordering a drink. One of the dudes was like, "You're Gordon Neal," and I was like, "What?" Like he recognized my voice from me ordering a drink, and this was in a flight to LA. And then when I got to Lightbox, like people were coming up and being like, "I know your voice from somewhere." And then as soon as they twigged, they were like, "Oh, I'm such a huge fan of the podcast." And and the podcast is how I got to work with Raf Gazzetti and how I got to go out there and work with him, and how I have these kind of big name people I know that, and it's not a gloat. It's because I'm a fan, right? When I worked up the RAF initially and Trojan Horse in 2018, I was like, I'm a fan of your work. I knew about his work, from California all the way to Canada, working on Mass Effect and then in God of War. And most people I meet, like yourself, I'm like, I'm not just like blowing smoke up your ass. Like I've
I
loved
appreciate that.
Abe's. I've loved Abe's. For a very young age, that game was a lot to me when I was very young, and I played them, from Abe's Odyssey and all the way through to like Oddworld and The Stranger's Wrath and Munchies and everything that you came out I consumed because I loved those games because they were so different. It's like when people talked about the last year about me playing games and how you play, like you've got your League of Legends, you've got your Apex, you've got your Call of Duties. One of the best games for me in the last year was Death Stranding, like Hideo Kojima's
Hmm.
hit,
Hmm.
because it was so different. It was
Hmm.
beyond what games I thought could be at the time, and that's why I love your games specifically because
I appreciate that.
it's the difference. It's the difference of trying to send a message rather than tell a story. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Well, that's
Yeah.
what I found. I mean, I appreciate you pointing that out. And how I felt was in my darkest hours, growing up and
Mhm.
and paying for my own school in New York City, working in the South
Mhm.
Bronx to pay for my own school was like
Mhm.
at the time was just you couldn't believe it, man. It was just
Yeah.
like a war zone. But
Mhm.
or it looked like London after the bombing of World War II. It was just
Oh
all
God, yeah.
burned out and all ruins. And if
I've
you ever
seen
watch the
Joker.
movie,
Yeah,
yeah,
New
yeah,
York in the
Joker.
1980s. Yeah,
That's right, man.
yeah.
And so I was having to go up to South Bronx to make to make money to
Mhm.
then pay for school and survive. But
Yep.
so a lot of hustling there. But you were saying just before then, sorry, was
Like sending a message rather than telling a story,
yeah.
basically. Yeah.
So what I found was like I think we need some kind of moral, ethical base root in
Mhm.
ourselves, right? And if we don't have that, I think we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So for me, I wasn't finding it with religion. I got really pissed off with religion, and
Mhm.
I was like, I got really annoyed with science teachers in schools that would say animals
Mhm.
don't have real emotions. They're just an operating set of behavioral,
Yeah.
evolved. They're kind of like machines, but they're not. And I was like,
Mhm.
I've had better connections with my dog than most people. We understand each
Yeah.
other better than a lot of things. It's like Jane Goodall said; she learned the most about animals from her
Mhm.
dog, never from a school, never from a scientist, never. So I kind of rejected a lot of this materialistic world that I was seeing because I,
Mhm.
I I had a little more like I loved and connected with animals, and I could see
Mhm.
people that wouldn't, and people that
Mhm.
didn't have the empathy to it, and then how you could get a like I used to. sort of be challenged by, some would say, well, this dog was abused, so it's really shy or it's really dangerous, stuff like this. And I as a kid, I'd used to be like, well, that's kind of sad, and I just like,
Yeah.
I would be like, I can win this dog over. And if you think that's like robotic, zeros and ones just flipping through, the nature of being alive and a mechanical universe, it's like, no, there's a whole nother sentience and level of communication that's going there. And we can just communicate with body language, and they know. And to the degree of, it's funny because I was just talking about this on a podcast yesterday, but to the degree of, I'm meeting people here. I'm in Sedona, Arizona now, which is where I, hoped to retire. So I'm not retired yet, but this is the spot I wanted to retire in. It's arguably the most beautiful place in the world. It's unbelievable. Yeah. But I'm sorry, it's real early for me. I just got up.
You're fine. It's okay. Yeah. But again, message, not story. But you're talking about Arizona retiring there, and then coming from.
Yeah. But the point is, people would be saying things about, like, you just see a different connection to life, like Native Americans had a different connection to life. And of course, that gives you a different perspective. But then you see this world they're trying to tell you in school, like, dissect the frog. I was like, I don't want to fucking kill a frog. I love frogs. Why do I want to kill a frog? What is going to be important in my career? Killing frogs. Like, no, you're desensitizing people. And then you find out this is how you get people to go to wars and shit like this, is you start them off young, desensitizing them. And I was sensitized, not desensitized. So I was like, fuck your institutional
You're an
bullshit.
empath like me. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. And I think we all are. It's a question of whether we shut it off or not, Yeah. And so for me, what happened was, where I wasn't finding any faith in any institutionalized religions or new age stuff, or, all this different spectrum of emerging, I found it in Yoda. When Yoda started talking, and I started seeing Star Wars, and then I'm seeing Yoda, I was like, that's it. I believe that, because I feel like I've been experiencing that. And
the Force.
I have zero interest about having a discussion with a militant materialist about how there's no such thing as chi, or it's like, shut the fuck up. Because I can tell you this, I would have no legs right now if I relied on Western medicine alone. Acupuncture saved my ass. I had through the difficulties of delivering new and tasty, I got 2 cases of Bell's palsy, right? My face got paralyzed, once on this side and once on the other side. The Western medicine guys are like, well, we still don't understand what it is, but we think it's a virus that ties itself around the nerve. So here, we're going to give you this antiviral drug, prednisone. I think it was prednisone. And then I go to, and fortunately, I had a Yale PhD, but Asian doctor who had an open mind, right? And this woman, and she said, look, we don't understand Bell's palsy, but the guy that treats it the best here's his number, and he's down the street. So I get in touch with him, and he was a ex-pharmacist, Korean of origin, ex-pharmacist, who, after Western medicine failed his wife, started opening his mind again to something that was a large family tradition that he rejected because he wanted to think more clinically and a critical thinker, and science and this guy cured my Bell's palsy, like, boom, with needles and herbs, no drugs. He's like, would they give you prednisone? I was like, yeah. He goes, throw that shit out. None of that works. I know. I was a pharmacist. None of it works. And I'm being very vague right now when he goes, no, it works. But most drugs don't actually work. And so that experience was like, I don't trust. If I trust Western medicine for trauma, like if I crash a bike and my limbs are broken and my guts are hanging out, I need a Western doctor now. I don't need an acupuncturist, right? But if you want to understand how to be in optimal health, go to the ancient ways of health, and
the Eastern ways, probably.
I think so. Yeah. But there's also, like, the Native Americans. I'm surrounded now by not surrounded, but in close proximity, very large areas of land. I mean, we are truly in the wilderness. From my window, occasionally people are seeing bighorn sheep on the on the cliff tops. Like, I'm looking out at Red Rock monuments right now. Sorry, I can't have a camera on it. But the point is that if you do enough research, you're like, the Native Americans were figuring out all kinds of ways and remedies through herbs, right? They figured out an antidote to smallpox. They just figured it out. But if you talk to shamanic cultures about how they figure things out, it's usually like they're in an altered state of mind. They're connecting with something else, and that something else is giving them information. And so if you get into like real hallucinogens, DMT, ayahuasca, stuff like this, or anywhere where they had very powerful sort of healing practices, they were always, in these shamanic cultures, they were always doing something to get in an altered state where they could receive information that you couldn't get otherwise. And then,
dude, but I was going to say they're just starting to trial mushrooms now as a way to treat clinical depression because they say it works. But then there's people who are like, I've known this for years. I've known this for decades. Like,
I've known it for years.
Yeah.
And I used to do, when I was working in aerospace, I used to do a thing I called burn and bake. And so burn was I'd go through like a 6 to 8 week project and just work around the clock and every weekend and stuff like that. I just cared about making it look great, So I actually had the keys to our lab in TRW. But on the weekend, when I go in there, I'd have to like pass Marines with M1s and shit, and they'd shake your hand and try and break it because I was like a long-haired hippie looking dude, and so it was like you were being challenged. But I literally would go in on the weekends. No one was in these big aerospace buildings on the weekends, and I'd go in because I just wanted the project to look better. But anyway, I was working around the clock, and that was my burn period. And then I'd take a few days and I'd go to Joshua Tree, which is a high desert, national forest, and pretty incredible place out in California. And in doing that, I used to go out there with like water and some granola bars and shit and a bunch of mushrooms. And through that, I've learned some of the most important things that I no way could have learned otherwise. And so there's more going on than just trippy vision. There's more going on than just your brain chemistry. We have the opportunity to log into something that Terence McKenna, are you familiar with his work? He was like the Timothy Leary of the 90s. Yeah. So he wrote a book called Food of the Gods, which was all about the sort of...
I know you're talking about. Yeah.
Which is all about the relationship of psychoactives in the history of civilization and evolution.
Joe Rogan talks about him a lot because Joe Rogan's a big advocate as well for DMT, which he says is a huge healer. Yeah.
Sometime maybe I'll get on the show. Maybe they'll have me on the show and we'll talk about my DMT experiences. And other hallucinogen experiences where, I actually believe these things are, for lack of a better word, sacred. And they should be treated that way, with a lot of humility and a lot of appreciation and a lot of asking for protection. Because I do believe you're opening yourselves up to things. It's like, there was forever, we didn't know that colds were caused by germs or viruses or this and that. We just, some people get it, some people don't. And then, but now, then we learn, there's these little things. We can find them under a microscope. They're called germs, right? And it's kind of like where I feel like we are with understanding psychoactives and, basically an undetected, or as Rupert Sheldrake would call them, theoretical physicist, the morphogenic fields, which is the subtle fields of something we're not detecting, we're not paying attention to, we're not measuring yet, that surrounds all living things. And through hallucinogens, I've come to believe that absolutely information is passing back and forth, and you can experience things that are more real than this world is. And I know that sounds crazy, but DMT people will tell you that too. Like you get in there, like when I did DMT, and I did it with Andrew Jones and another guy, Fong. But I was kind of terrified because I had researched it for about 20 years already, and I was kind of terrified about it. And the more you know about it, the more. It wasn't like toxicity because there's none of that, but you truly get sort of teleported into another dimension. And and when I was in the DMT realm, it only lasts about 15 minutes. But when I was in that realm, without going into a deep story on it, about 3 to 4 minutes in complete and utter awe, like just the first thing I realized was I never understood what alien meant. I thought I did, but I didn't. I thought ETs and shit. No, alien is that which is not a cell in your body that resonates with any familiarity with what you're looking at, except it's a million times smarter than anything here on this planet. Like if our industrial revolution was 150 years ago, theirs was 150 million years ago. It's like whatever you're seeing, it's really intimidating. And like 4 minutes in, I started to have this really weird sensation that I had never felt before in my life, and then it registered me what it was: homesick.
Oh,
It was
okay.
that, and I don't mean alien like Grays and shit. I mean, it's impossible to describe. The fidelity makes our five senses look dull as an old 45 black and white, 45-inch record or a black and white
Of
TV
course, yeah.
compared to what you
Yeah.
see, and then you come back, and then reality's dull again and less sophisticated. And so I felt sorry
Yep.
for humanity. Like I really felt sorry because I just felt like we were still so primitive and still so egotistical, thinking we know it all. And we're right on the verge of discovering the God particle. It's like, oh God, I've been listening to this my whole life.
Yeah.
And I told this once to a neuroscientist because I'm really interested in neuroscience, not at a scientific level, at a consciousness level. But of course, if you want to understand these things, you got to listen, to people of science. And I was talking to a really well-known brain surgeon, and he was talking about, the God particle and stuff like this. I said, well, here's an interesting thing. And I said this with confidence because I know from experience, we don't know shit.
Right.
And I said, here's the thing. I said, if I showed you this 20 years ago, or, let's say 40 years ago, you wouldn't even know what it is. Right. And I would say to you, well, first I said this. I said, you are never going to find the memory molecule. Because it's not in the molecule, it's in the cloud. And then he looks at me like, what are you talking about? I go, you're looking for where the dream is stored in a chemical. It's not in a chemical, it's in the cloud. And your brain is an antenna to your cloud, holographic experience. Now, this is something like Rupert Sheldrake would really get into, or Terence McKenna would really get into. But when you're looking at that, I said, so you're looking for this, like, where's the information of holographic world that's stored in a single chemical, right? It doesn't exist there. Now, I build worlds. Like, there's nothing in our games that you see that we didn't have to design. Everything. Like sometimes I'm talking to architects or other people, dentists solving surgery problems, and they'll go, how do you know that? And I'd be like, it's all just a design problem, right? It's all just a design problem. If we look at it in these ways and we sort of apply some, pattern recognition or whatever, we can figure things out differently. And in the hallucinogen landscape, there's information to be found. I would really discourage like partying with hardcore hallucinogens. I think it's really, I've seen people, they just trip out, like you're dealing with, it's almost like you're dealing with nuclear energy, but you don't want to have shielding. It's like, no, man, have shielding, like respect it. Don't just think, oh, well, how can I get high tonight? And, I saw a lot of people dive off that cliff and never come back in different ways. But there's something sacred there. It was understood thousands of years ago. It's still understood by some parties today. And now we're refining it, But in that, what I said to him was, I said, you're still looking for that hologram of information of a world that's stored in a chemical. I said, you're never going to find it because it's not there. It's in the cloud. Like this, 40 years ago, if I said, this is the magic box, and in this magic box, you tell me anything, and I will show it to you because it's already in here. And I said, but it's not in here. This is just a cloud. But you didn't know a cloud existed. Right. And I said, that's where we're at. And then he got up and he gave a talk and he said, Lorne said something really interesting, that our memories and all are in the brain. And he goes, well, brain damage has shown that you'll get EI. And I said, yeah. And if you look at a ham radio antenna, you can receive up to, depending on your power, amplification, etc., you can receive over 50,000 channels of information, AM, FM, high bandwidth, military bandwidth, police, emergency bandwidth, and the whole ham spectrum, right? I said, but go break a piece of that antenna and you will lose an area of reception. And I said, so when you get brain damage, you're affecting a neural pathway to a memory. And now that memory is no longer connecting to the cloud where your information is stored. Now that's my faith. And I think we'll find that. I think we will find that. I think we'll find almost everything eventually with science. And I think we're still pretty stupid in the scheme of things right now.
Oh, of course. Right.
So anyway, it was like it's in the cloud, like we operate to a cloud, and I believe that, and militant materialists would say, well, that's not even possible. You're just Looney Tunes. I'm like, well, then how did I know this? How did I know that?
we're viewing things as humans, right? Whereas we think
Yes.
we're the most evolved species on the planet. But then there was a thing I watched, and we were talking about this before as well, before we started recording, about
Yeah.
conspiracy theories and things that are in the world. But I remember watching a video, and I can't remember how I found it. Don't tell me how I found it, but just trolling one night, and it was a guy who used to work for the Canadian military space program,
I know
and
who
he
it
talked
is.
about so he talked about
Is it Hutchinson?
I think maybe I couldn't 100%, but yeah, probably.
Okay.
But
Okay.
he talked about how there's actually within our solar system, there's a galactic federation of different alien planets and
that stuff.
alien
Yeah.
existence, and they actually come to monitor us and talk to us, and they're at the moment they're seeing us as like the lowest on the totem pole, right? We're the lowest form of intelligence. We aren't evolved enough to join this federation, and I mean, if you look at the way we've probably existed over the last 200-300 years, right? Like, no wonder when you look at us, we still infight, we still we still launch wars and fight amongst ourselves, and it's a thing where the higher consciousness is something I think our ancestors maybe figured out where we stepped away from. Because when you look at Abe and the way he works with meditation, with the shamans, with even when they used to do stuff like vision quests, a lot of that time was inhaling psychedelics and then seeing what came from that, and it was away from them to access stuff. So because I think technology is in front of our face, right? Our phones are like here constantly, like in front of our face. You're missing what's beyond. Like, you look at your window, that's the beyond, right? That's what you should be looking at, is the trees and plants in your front yard. That's the connection. That's the voyage to up. So yeah, I think we've lost part of our humanity almost with technology interjecting it, right?
Yeah, it's certainly a conundrum. It's the weirdest thing. It's like technology. It's a bipolar curse and blessing in many ways simultaneously. And so it really means we have to have another discipline so we don't just get sucked in and addicted. And I would say, like, if we look at gaming, and we saw some early signs of this, like in Korea, we really had more of a gaming audience before China did. And it's due to piracy, but without going through it, and then the Chinese kids that really wanted to play games and were really smart were really pissed off because no one was selling games there, because arguably maybe the Chinese government was sponsoring factories that were copying all the games. And Dave Perry told me one time, he goes, and I want to come back to China and gaming.
I love how you just run that off the cuff that Dave Perry told you one time, even though he's a legend himself.
I've been really lucky. With the people I met, and people like Dave Perry. This was, I was saying earlier, a little difference between Hollywood and gaming is Dave Perry was somebody, and yet gave me the time of day before I was even in the industry. So did Tommy Tallarico. They were at Version together, and I was able to start talking to these guys. And I think part of the reason they were listening, because I was working on movies and shit, right, with 3D graphics, and they knew that's where games were going, and I was now interested in games. But anyway, these were very open, but these were, known names. Try that in television. Try that in film. Try that in music. Their stars are walking around with their head up their ass, and fucking everyone's bowing down to these new semblances of entertainment royalty, right? And I was just like always turned off by that scene. But the game industry was different, and it was, people were more willing to help each other. And it wasn't about star power. It wasn't like, well, he's the director and that's the lead actor, and everyone on the set better kiss their ass or you're fired. And that's it. Like, when you're on a Hollywood set, I always find it like, I never liked the live action process. And a lot of it was because of the hierarchy of the monarchies on the set. And you get these people that are being treated like royalties, and then they come to expect it, and then they become real assholes as people. Of course. But what I found in the game business was you definitely had aggressive people that were trying to make lots of money, and then there's any industry where money's involved, you'll have shenanigans. But for the most part, the game industry talents got along and tried to help each other. They weren't trying to sabotage one another. Now maybe within a big company, there's plenty of people trying to sabotage one another. But when you're talking about, like, I could call someone with a problem, and they'd pick it up, and there's, if you go through a lot of the names of the last 20 years of games, and chances are I know them, but there's very few that went, wow, this guy's just a total asshole. But in Hollywood, that was a typical walk down the street. He's asshole, right? And so there's something about that. And in a lot of ways, I feel the digital arts community is very similar, where you can go on to something like ArtStation. People can talk to someone like yourself, or
Right.
they can reach out and maybe get answers from other people. And if their work
Yeah.
is good, they'll get more responses.
Of course.
Like if your work is really good, and you're like,
Mhm.
Craig, Craig Mullins, I just would
Mhm.
really love your opinion. If you could,
Mhm.
if it's crap, he might reply and say, yeah, other people can help you with this.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if
yeah.
it's really good, he'd say, you know what, yeah, maybe you could work on this or that, or I really like how you do these other things. And so it
Mhm.
didn't have the same egocentric, driven sort of star talent in the
Right.
game industry. And I'm not saying some people didn't fall victim to that at different times, but it
Of
was
course.
much more humbling because I think the effort is so hard.
Yeah.
And especially if you started your own company and, you're wearing
Mhm.
all these hats and you're trying to wrangle all this stuff. And,
Yeah.
I see some people, they feel like, I see this mistake. It's happened a few times. You can probably identify it yourself without me
Mhm.
naming names. But what happens is people do something as a part of a team, and then they start thinking they deserve most of the credit the way a director or a writer might feel in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And but they completely underestimate what it took to build the organization that they were in as part of a team that then succeeded at something great.
Yeah.
And then they go out on their own and they try it and they just fail miserably. And so
Yeah.
we've seen that a number of times with different characters, and I think it's a very humbling experience. But
Mhm.
they underestimate what the infrastructure was that allowed them the platform to shine.
Mhm.
And then they think, well, I'm this great, and I'm just going to go get some money, and hey, people want to throw money at me, I'm going to do it. But rarely
Mhm.
does that turn into something where it actually happens. Like we're talking about Tim
Yeah.
Schafer, he did it. Um,
Mhm.
his partner back in the day, creative partner back in the day, who did the children's games later, like
Yeah.
Pajama Sam and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ron, I'm forgetting his last name at the moment. Sorry.
Gilbert.
Gilbert, yeah. And he
Mhm.
did it, right? Like they came out of LucasArts and then they started their
Mhm.
own companies and then eventually they were successful and then eventually they were
Yeah.
rich. Good for them.
Mhm.
But they would
Mhm.
still give you the time of day,
Mhm.
and not the same in most entertainment. People aren't the same. They
Yeah.
become very shielded and they become very
Mhm.
protected, and then they're protected by hordes of entourages that are largely not nearly as competent as they were, and they start
Yeah.
believing their own PR, and that's a massive trap if you start to get popular or something is believing your own PR. And I think there's yeah. So I'll leave it there and let you comment. Sorry.
No, yeah, no. I was just going to say it's it's a lot to take in when you talk about the games industry, but I think you're very right in what you're saying. I know when I went to Lightbox, I actually got to speak to Ian McCaig for like a whole like 30 minutes, and
Yeah.
the guy
Yeah.
couldn't be nicer. Like, and he's obviously a legend in his own writing. And Dave
Totally.
Perry, yeah, Dave Perry, for you kids who don't know, made something that I'm very fond of, which was called Earthworm Jim back in the day, and
That's
that
right.
was one of my favorite games. But it's funny though, people don't even know recently in the last 10 years, Dave Perry actually built and patented the technology that now powers PlayStation Now, which is the streaming service.
It was
I've
brilliant.
been using Google Stadia for the last 2 years since they launched it, but I was testing on live back in the day in 2010. But he was also ahead of the curve. So a lot of these guys, like you talk about, like Dave Perry, Tim Schafer, it's an entrepreneurship thing that takes over where, like you said, you're creative constantly, you're making new ideas, like John Romero back in the day making id Software and all those guys at the first kind of ground level. It was a very Wild West way of making businesses, but then a lot of those guys have really prospered in the long run.
Yeah. And like, and some of them have had some really hard hits and come out humbler and better people on the other side, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
but it's humbling, man. Like you eat crow,
Mm-hmm.
it sucks when
Mm-hmm.
your fans hate you for a window of time, or other people just don't like something you said. And
Yeah.
being visible, you just have to, like, I didn't used to believe it when people said, movie stars would say, I don't read my own reviews. They, what did you think of
Mm.
what Time Magazine wrote about your performance? You're like, I don't know, I didn't read it. And I was like,
Yeah.
bullshit. But they were right, and I didn't realize it. But people ask me today, I'm like, I don't know, I didn't read it. I don't want to read it. I don't want to hear if someone's hating on me. I'd just rather not have it affect my day.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be that, and it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to try and be better at what I do, and not be as much of an
Mm-hmm.
asshole as I was when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So we go into that process, but uh, all the characters you're mentioning, it's like it's very interesting to watch their journey. And I saw Dave Perry. He was at this thing that was being kind of sponsored by PR agencies and venture capitalists up in Sonoma in a wine, like at a wine resort or something. And we were there, and I think I might have had to do a talk. I don't really remember, but I remember watching Dave's talk, and he was talking about his cloud gaming service that he was going to use as a marketing, right? And so I got to see that before he was bigly funded on that alone, and this is a few years before he sold it to Sony. And he said something brilliant, and when he said it, it was like I went, like he was ahead of the time in a lot of ways. And you got to understand Dave Perry's history, and I'm not the authority on it, but I know enough. He was in Ireland. I don't even think he went to high school, but he was a great programmer. And he was a good enough programmer that he could solve problems that other people couldn't. And this allowed him to start, and he was always smart business. And I'm sure he studied it, and some people, everyone has to study it. None of it's really super intuitive unless you're like a reborn again Carnegie or something.
Yeah.
But and he said the light went off for NVIDIA when I showed them that on people's computers at home through my service, they could test the game on your newest card that's not even in their machine. Yeah. And they were like, this is NVIDIA, right? And Jensen, we started Oddworld around the same time they started NVIDIA. And Jensen's just off the charts, genius, right? CEO, founder of Jensen. And I was like, you're showing something to Jensen and company, and their head is bending. Their brain is bending to try and comprehend it. And I didn't really understand it at the time. I mean, as he explained it, I was like, wow, that is brilliant, man. I can try a new card on my computer without installing the new card and get the graphics performance out of it, right? And of course, it would depend on how good your bandwidth was and how close you were to the server farm. That's, later became, streaming, right? And but he had these ways of thinking about things. So he was able to finagle in Ireland. This is just like, thinking like an engineer, he thought kind of like an entrepreneurial artist. It's not that different, where they go, this is my skill. How can I leverage it the best? And because he was so unique at solving problems from Ireland, he was able to start commanding royalties on games as an engineer, which was largely unheard of. And through that, he was able to start making money. He goes over to the United States. He gets into it was Virgin Games at the time, right? And that's where they made Earth, and then he started Shiny, and then Earthworm Jim came out, and that was like the launch project for it. And I remember because I was down there looking at it as it was developing.
Oh God!
And as they were doing the very beginnings of. It was an Aladdin game, which was really the first time people were doing real cell animation. This was at Virgin. Tommy took me through, and Dave was showing me some stuff. And then he goes off and starts Shiny, right? But this is a guy you should never bet against because he just has this luck. It's luck.
Look at Irish.
Luck we create. Maybe that was it, man. Luck we do create by being perpetual. Like if you want bad luck, just stop it what you're doing and hope the world comes to you, and then you'll have nothing but bad luck, But as long as you keep on hitting that treadmill and don't give up. Don't give up, right? Even when it seems discouraging. In his case, he had the independent developer. They're going up and down. He was ready to sell for a certain amount of money, and then he sold for like 3.5 times that unexpectedly, right? And we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and that was when he sold Shiny. And then he builds another basically real time server streaming game company that he then sells for a few $100 million to Sony. Never bet against Dave Perry, man. He just somehow surfs the waves and keeps on arriving,
I don't know what it is about our local talent, because if you think about it, right, so Dave Perry, who is this great creative soulstorm of what is made now, but he's Irish, in origin. If you look at Ian McCaig, he grew up and schooled in Glasgow in Scotland, and then now John Romero has now moved to Ireland to work there because of the appeal of the country. But there's a thing where I think not just within European, but maybe the UK or just the Celts that we are, the Scottish and Irish. it's a determination. I think, just a fair weather thing you get across there, but we get the hard weather because we grew up in the dirt and the cold. But like, I mean, it took me 8 years from leaving my job to going through university to grinding to freelancing, get my qualifications, networking, and now I have my first foot in the door.
Yeah.
But I just never stopped. And I think people always email me, like there's kids who email me from like Australia who are like, I'm giving up my job and going back to school because you inspired me. And I always think, well, I'm not special. Like, I didn't do anything different. But then I do look back at my journey and see the steps I took and how I just never gave up at any point. And I think it's a thing where, like you said, if you grew up in tough times or you fall in tough times, it just builds your resilience internally to just keep going and never give up, which is something you're living proof of.
And thank you. And I believe you're hitting the nail exactly on the head. And that gets to why I was creating the stories I was for Oddworld, which was I started figuring out, I was like, I'm probably not going to be as successful, even if like Hollywood's full. The best writers have probably never been published. The best potential directors probably never got the gig. Right? Like there's amazing talent. There's amazing singers and musicians. You just never heard of them. They never got that break. And there's only so many that can be distributed. But now we live in another universe where they can self-publish and great, right? But or you can have podcasts and you can become known as someone that's interfacing between the crowd and specialists and bringing that to people, and you get exposure. But right before that, we were saying, sorry, it's still early for me.
No, again, it was falling hard times makes you a bit resilient to never give up, basically.
So where I was saying before, Yoda became my pillar. Like I could reflect back almost everything I was experiencing to Yoda, and it was kind of like it gave me a faith without being this institutionalized, dogmatic faith of thousands of years. Not that I'm rejecting them; it just wasn't for me. And I was like, wow, that gives me something. And in the hardest times. That and a few other things I could do, and I could just go out and I could study nature, and I'd start getting answers. I'd feel completely overwhelmed, but then I'd see this swarm of ants like quickly dissolving a Snickers bar, melting in the sun. And I'd be like, "Look at how small they are, but look what they just conquered." I was trying to find inspiration wherever I could get it, just to keep going and not give up. And so. I felt like I was looking at the world in 1992, and I was starting to realize that big simulators were going to become commonplace video game machines. And I'd seen that world, $14 million fully submersive tank and F-14 simulators, with G-forces, and crazy shit. And I was like, wow, this is the Nintendo machine just a few years away. I should be looking at games. And so I started really, investigating games and stuff. But
you met that Japanese guy, right? The guy who done the machines and sold the machines across America, right?
Oh yeah, Masayoshi-san, the founder of SoftBank. Yeah. So it's like I'm really lucky. Like I met him; he was the richest guy in Japan. Took us out to dinner. Bill Gates with the launch of Xbox. There's still a photo I'm trying to get. Right? And I didn't have it at CES, which is kind of being immortalized on the web as like the last great CES was when Microsoft announced the Xbox. But in that moment, Bill Gates is on the stage with Seamus Blackley, right? They're about this tall, and there's a screen this big. And I'm on the screen, like this, right? Like I'm talking, and like literally, my chin was bigger than Bill Gates on the screen. I was like, "Where's the photo? Who took the video?" Like I can't get a photo. The only time in my life I was bigger than the richest man in the world. There was the proof, and I still have not been able to get a photo of that moment. But I've met amazing people of amazing wealth and power at different times, and a lot of times it's not what you expect. I think Masayoshi-san was like a riot, man. That guy, and he was a gamer, right? And a lot of these people are gamers. Jensen, he loves graphics, man. I remember, going into NVIDIA, and I was working on a film. He thought he was going to see some of the film footage, but it wasn't. He was like, "Yeah, show me the graphics." It's like a kid. This guy's like, he's a multi-billionaire already. World's best chip designers. So it was. But getting back to that, it's like, what are you pinning your inspirational hope on? And I saw people lose in life. Whether it's suicide. I've known a lot of people that's happened to, or drug addictions, or just giving up. Watching it in my own family, and through that, I was like, huh. how many people are playing games today? What's the average hours of mind share, let's say in North America alone, right? And I ran this calculation, how many games, how many average hours of games. And it was about 60 billion hours of mind share was going into gaming in North America alone in 1992. And I was like, wow. And, at the time, games were starting to get more violent and there was becoming a lot of controversy and politicians were opportunistically jumping on it. And, and I started to be like, this can do what Yoda did for me. We can create heroes that aren't the muscle-bound superhero you want to be, but more like the schmuck that you probably are. And I felt that way. And I was like, and there, if we can take the guy at the lowest, hanging at the bottom of the food chain, just dangling right at the very bottom of the food chain, but could eventually rise through being more empathetic and more understanding and smarter and never giving up, not the smartest guy in the shed, but a very pure heart. And then eventually he would rise to change the world. And that's kind of, what the Oddworld, the concept of the quintology was about. And so I started shaping characters that I tried to give younger people inspiration. And then I found it would happen with older people too. Like, I don't know, the story of Alf Gamble, you had mentioned this earlier, I think, or that was yesterday. Sorry. That was my yesterday conversation. But that was a 70-year-old man 72-year-old man in England who wrote us this long letter about how this game changed his life and saved his life as he was on the verge of suicide. And it was like, how does that happen? How does a 72-year-old guy wind up with a PlayStation? And so it was kind of a fascinating story. BBC did a story on it. Other stories, we've had a lot of stories where people say, this might not sound right and you might not believe me, but this is how your game gave me hope out of a deep depression where I was thinking I ended the world. And these things would happen. And now there's more parties interested in studying those games to find out what was really going on at a medicinal level, like at a mental health medicinal level. And for me, it was really about, this is why I was like, how do we get you to feel more empathetic about characters? How can we throw something that binds characters and not kill them, so instead of throwing a grenade or throwing a rock or shooting a bullet, how do we throw a word? And so just that illophobia, okay, just that there. That
was the craziest thing as well about Oddworld as well, because I never realized that you voiced Abe. That blew my mind. You voiced him, right?
yeah Soulstorm. I had to do all the voices. There was no one else available.
Oh god,
but check that out. Hopefully I get some awards for that. That's like, I want the
the voice acting awards are coming.
Hopefully. We'll see. But But so I wanted to create icons. And so then I started studying more about mythology, the role of mythology. Joseph Campbell had a huge influence on me with the hero's journey and really getting into there. And the Power of Myth series with Bill Moyer that was shot at the library of LucasArts. So I was like, this is what I want. I want to figure out how to create modern myths. And I was like, what are the things that concern me the most? The things that were concerning me was like the deforestation of the rainforest, the burning down, the fast food companies basically paying South American ranchers to burn their forests and grow cheap meat, right, for the sake of a happy face meal. And
which is still happening. Yeah,
it's still happening. And we got all kinds of these challenges, right? So we need to be smarter as a planet and not give in to fear. And fear, anyone who's pushing fear hard, I think is really do an analysis on whether they're trustworthy or not, because fear is the method to control people and herd them into places that aren't necessarily for their benefit. And so it was all about creating iconic characters that weren't someone that you wanted to be, but maybe you identified more as who your kind of lost place in the world. And through them, and this is another reason why I never had X number of lives and you die and then you start over. Like, this is something, I'm a huge respecter. I have massive respect for Nintendo and of course Miyamoto. But something I didn't like about the games was I felt like they were still being designed out of the arcade. And what I mean by that was the arcade was driving you to put another quarter in. And so it would
course.
make you fail within a certain amount of time. So you'd have to keep paying.
Mm.
And when it was like
Mhm.
three deaths and then you start all over, I felt like it was a remnant of the arcade age of quarter
Right.
stuffing, you know? And at the same time, I felt like when that would happen to me in a game, I'd get better, a little better, and then they'd just go,
Mm.
"You suck, do it all over." I'd be like, "Fuck
Mm.
this game," and
Yeah.
and I was always like a really rabid when I was playing games. You know, I'm glad I was never on Film Planet because I was just like, you know, angry gamer. And
Yeah.
with that, I was like, no, I want infinite tries, more like
Mhm.
life, you know,
Yeah.
infinite tries. And if I can get
Yeah.
infinite tries, you know what, can I hold on one second? I got a dog scratching
Yeah,
on my
of course.
door. Okay. And if I
Fine.
give infinite
I'll pause.
tries, then as long as you keep trying, eventually you'll succeed. And that was something I
Yeah.
saw people giving up because there was standards. Oh, thank you. Yeah, she
Mhm.
can come in. Come on, Walker. Here, sit down. This is my Chihuahua. Come on in here. Chihuahua mutt. And
Nice.
and so if we could create experiences where as long as you don't give up, eventually you can succeed. That was a big feeling of mine.
Mhm.
And not like you had to have a certain
Mhm.
level of skill to succeed. And this also went to
Mhm.
karma in the Oddworld games, which, you know,
Mhm.
except for Stranger, they all largely had, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the karma was a scoring based on, did you do the right thing or were you an asshole about it,
Mhm.
right? And I knew the pattern of gamers was that they just want to see the next level. And I know
Mhm.
because, you know, in our own studio, like people were arguing. It's like, look, man, you want to make me finish the whole game. And these were these are healthy arguments. Like in the creative process,
Mhm.
you really have to be willing to be challenged and listen to your team
Mhm.
and then try and find the best solution. But I was really being challenged on this concept. And they were saying,
Mhm.
I am not going to play a game, get to the end and be told I lost. And I was like, but life's
Mhm.
like that. Life's like that, right? Why not? And if we can make it compelling enough, and because
Yeah.
look, the gamer just wants to see the next level, and then they want to get the highest
Mhm.
score. They don't want to find out that they did things wrong way back in the past. And I was like, I
Mhm.
disagree, but I agree that that's where the paradigm is for games. But I think that infinite lives and karma. So how you beat it makes it a big determination on what happens to you after that.
That's
Right.
blowing
So
my mind, Lorne, because if you think about that, you were almost pioneering the decision matrix that was then introduced into stuff like Mass Effect, where people would make decisions and then the karma would come in. You would then have a good and bad ending. But you were doing that back in what, 97? Jesus
well, we started the
Christ.
game in '94. You know, it took us to '97
Yeah.
to build the company,
Wow.
the team,
That's
and the game, and
crazy
the
to think
tools.
that you were basically inventing that mechanic in a game.
Maybe I never talked to the Mass Effect guys to know if they were inspired by it or not. You know, and I do believe in
Yeah.
zeitgeist, which is basically if you're thinking about it, someone else probably is too in their cosmically
Yeah.
connected
Yeah.
morphogenic field that we live in, right? But
Mm.
but yeah, thank you. And that
Yeah.
was the reason. I was like, I think that if we make it so that you were supposed to save and you
Mhm.
didn't, I don't want to stop you and say you fucked up, you didn't play right. And that was another
Right.
thing I had about Nintendo games was I couldn't do the things I wanted to do because they were keeping it in a very family friendly realm, you know, like you can't
Mhm.
smack the guy you're supposed to be nice to. Like I wanted to do the things you weren't supposed to do. And so I was like, I
Yeah.
want to have the ability to do the wrong thing and keep going. You know,
Right.
and so if you
Mhm.
didn't save enough Mudokons, eventually the angry Mudokons do you in on the bad ending. And
Mm.
you know, the Soulstorm has a different, but it's still the karma.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Exodus and Munch and Abe's Odyssey had
Mhm.
that. And so that was the idea. But to you know, because I was the boss, I got to win the argument. But
Mhm.
but you know, the team went along with it. And then eventually we
Mhm.
found people saying, wow, because I got so into
Mhm.
the characters, like we were getting executive emails from the publisher going, I never
Mhm.
finish a game, but I finish yours.
Mhm.
And my wife never plays, but she played it to the end too. And he's like,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
is that? Or they would tell
Mhm.
me. And I think it's because like I really started to care for those little stupid Mudokons. And then
Mhm.
they'd listen to me and do something for me. And then they
Mhm.
get killed. And I felt terrible about it. And so I was like,
Yeah.
okay, if we can get empathy to be a core gaming mechanic, and of course, you know,
Mhm.
Sherry McKenna and I were talking about these things, and she was this
Mhm.
USC psychology grad, and so she was
Mhm.
really interested in like how, you know, how you might use these things and how do you use empathy as a gameplay mechanic, and so
Yeah.
you know, she had created a few great sound bites around that.
Mhm.
One was, you know, the paradigm is aggression equals
Mhm.
rewards, but what if empathy could equal rewards. So I was like, well, what if aggression could just get you a doomed destiny, but then empathy gets you a real win.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what drove No Lives, GameSpeak, and Karma. Was making games that people contemplated more about their own life, and by doing it in a fantasy world, for lack of a better, an alternate broken mirror world of our own, where I didn't have to make fun of McDonald's and someone might be feeding their kids because that's all they can afford. I didn't want that real world block to arrive with. I don't want to hear this shit. And so instead it gets called Rupture Farms, And that was the idea. And I was really heavily inspired by Orwell. So probably the most potent books I'd ever read was Animal Farm, 1984, and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So those things were conscious in there, and a lot of time, a lot of the industry was like, "Look, man, we're not making art, we're making games, all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, that's what peep show makers thought."
I disagree.
Thought at the turn of the century when movies were just trains going by and for nickel machines on the Chicago boardwalk. They didn't think it was an art form yet either, until full feature length movies became the replacement for theater, right?
Yeah, I'm conscious of your time as well, and I want to keep you for too long because I know you've got a day to have as well and a life out there. So, but yeah, we'll maybe try and get you back on at one point and talk more, because like I feel like if we could talk for hours, because it's one of these things where you find something in the vibe of games. Yeah, the vibe of games and other things, you just get so lost in it. But it's good because you're passionate, right? That's why it comes out, because you're so excited about stuff and stuff.
And I love the subtext more than the main stories.
Of course,
I love
the guys,
yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but I'm going to say that's probably where I differ from interviews, because you're getting the usual, Soulstorm after 10 years and tell me all about it. But I'm like, dude, psychedelics, like talk about the shamans, the acupuncture, like the world meanings, what's going on. I dive that deep, but then I think that's where the better conversations come from, right? When you take the surface levels, you're getting asked 20,000 times, oh, so you go, IGN gave you this score, what do you think about it? And you're like, I don't fucking, I'm like, yeah, I made the game, like, what do you think? So you tell me what you thought about it, didn't ask me. But so I'm more like I try to get to know the person, because even when I interview famous artists, I'm trying to dig into like, who are you? Like, what makes you tick? And that's where I think the connection comes out better than the surface level stuff about Xbox, PlayStation shit.
You should interview Andrew Jones if you haven't yet. And
if you can hook it up, I'm down to interview absolutely anybody you could recommend, because I love getting people on here and opening their minds.
Let me see what I can do. He's busy as hell, but he's really wise.
Everybody is
really wise on a more fine arts sort of intellectual level and spiritual level. So he's really interesting character. I'll try and do that for you. But I'd be happy to come back on. It's a pleasure to talk to. About this.
Thank you very much, Lorne.
Great questions. My pleasure. And take care. And just let you're connected with Angie, so just let Angie know, and we can put it on the schedule whenever you want to do it, Gordy.
Yeah, of course, man. Well, if you guys are listening and you've got to this part at the end, thanks for listening. I know it's been a bit of a longer episode, but again, we've really enjoyed talking, so that's where we are. But if you have any questions for Lorne, I'm sure you can reach out at one point, or you can check out his games, of course. Oddworld and Soulstorms just came out, so make sure you guys pick it up. And thanks again to Lorne for coming on. It's been a great chat, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. If you're listening, you can check us out on YouTube. We have the video podcast, and then again, we're on our various different sites for Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes. So just check us out there as well. And thanks for listening, guys. We'll catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.